All right. I'm Ben Burgis. This will give them an argument. I am joined again by Brent Lengel, since, as I assume most people watching this know, we had started last Thursday to do a debate breakdown, and we had to end early because of technical difficulties that were entirely on my end. And I am cautiously optimistic that that shouldn't come up tonight, because I'm not going to bore anybody with the technical stuff, but I think I've sorted out my issue. But if I'm wrong about that, I do have a different computer I can switch to. So if we start to glitch out, I'm just going to stick on the intermission music and I'll switch computers real quick. But I'm not too worried about it right now. But just to catch people up, I don't know. I keep having, I just finished, I guess it was like a while ago, but like last year, right? I did a big rewatch of the early 2000s Battlestar Galactica, so I've kind of got that in my head. Last time on Battlestar Galactica. Last time on the Thursday night debate breakdown. So we were started to watch this debate on immigration between sort of two very ideologically mixed sides. So there is, on the pro-immigration, we should have, less restrictive policies, or certainly at least not more than we have now. We had Cenk Uygur, who of course is from the Young Turks and is a lefty kind of guy, and Nick Gillespie, who's the editor of Reason magazine, which is sort of the flagship of like the most mainstream version of like free market libertarianism in the US. And on the yes, we should have more restrictive immigration policy side, I'm kind of avoiding using their framing that, so the Free Press, which sponsored it, the question they've got that they're framing it with is, should the U.S. shut its borders, which sort of makes it sound like they're wide open right now. But on the yes, we should have more restrictive immigration policy side, there is, Sohrab Ahmari, who is, who's a sort of, somebody who has at least moderately social democratic kind of economic views, but is much more culturally conservative. I've seen him describe himself as a pro-life New Dealer. At
least he's consistent.
Yeah, he's consistent. I mean, he's not a, he's a combination of things that wouldn't be that unusual in a lot of European countries where they have like, Christian democratic parties and stuff that don't quite map onto the US, but is in the US, it reads as fairly odd. And, he's somebody who, I actually like him as a person, but yes, many disagreements. He's been on this show twice to argue with me about various things. Then also Ann Coulter, who, I don't know, I think is probably most concisely described as an evil clown. And so what we've watched so far is Barry Weiss, who's the moderator, setting it all up, doing a kind of ridiculous poll that we bashed for a while last time. And then we've watched like 2.5 of the opening statements before the tech issues knocked us out of it last time. So we had, Ann Coulter do what we described last time as essentially racist slam poetry. And then we had Nick Gillespie do something that I think both of us probably agreed with most of, although it sort of took a hard turn at the end, which is sort of generally...
I'm mad at you, Nick. You were doing real well till like that last sentence.
Yeah. There are like generally good sort of pro-immigrant sentiments that, like, he didn't say anything like super, he didn't say anything earth-shattering, but it was like generally good stuff. It was like, look, we've had, panics about immigrants throughout American history. It's, the sort of people people who are panicking, always kind of turn out to be wrong. And it's okay for for people to come in. And then at the end he said this thing about how, just to remind you that he was from reason, he said this thing about how we should be building a wall around the welfare state, not the border, which reminds me, by the way, in some ways I actually think the most despicable position on immigration I've ever heard, although it's really just unusually explicit advocacy of the status quo, which was Milton Friedman, who said that we shouldn't have more legal immigration because then immigrants would have access to the welfare state. So, but also immigrants are good, so we should just encourage illegal immigration. So it's like, very openly stated that you're just going to have this like army of like people who are desperate enough to work in whatever conditions you want them, which finally brings us to where we left off, which was we were about halfway through Sohrab's opening statement. He quoted the sort of series of labor leaders, leftist Democrats, a couple people who I think are better than leftist Democrats, who over the course of history have expressed concerns about immigrant labor driving down wages and things like that. And he was just kind of getting in, sort of moving off of the, he was sort of moving off of the quotes and like just starting to give his actual argument when we cut off. So I think I've set the timing to like, this might be like 45 seconds or something before we left off, but I think I've set it to like just where he stops leaning on the quotes and starts the argument. So do you have anything you wanted to add to that summary?
Well, yes, two things. The first is you need to always introduce GTAA with that last time on Battlestar Galactica voice. That was just chef's kiss. So that's the one thing. The second thing, to provide context for people with the Reason magazine. You guys may not know this. I have a video all about this on my channel. But a lot of the right libertarian talking points are actually left libertarian points that have been sort of repurposed. There was a major propaganda shift that happened between Charles Koch and possibly even the FBI in the 1970s. And it was a direct response to the Yippie movement. So they were trying to specifically build a political movement that young people who, want to smoke weed or, be socially free can do that, but within a capitalist mindset. So just keep that in mind when you are dealing with a right-wing libertarian. A lot of them believe what they say, but they are kind of unaware of where their arguments are actually coming from. Because you will find a lot of similar stuff with the left anarchists, but then they don't suddenly decide to, pitch people out off of money that they need to live like right then. Okay, so I hope that context helps.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's always interesting thinking about issues like that, right? Because like you have, I think that I think the historical origins can tell us something, right? If billionaires are supporting something a lot, it's fair to ask why, like what they think they're going to get out of it, and that can definitely tell you something about how it's going to affect billionaires versus the rest of us. But I also think I don't know. I mean, lots of people have been supported for a lot of reasons, right? By different unsavory groups, and the sort of the core thing to me is just that they're wrong, right? Like that
I will agree with you on that. And for the record, I do not have hard evidence about the FBI connection, but there is a when you guys get it, just Google fools, finks, and FBI stooges. It's an article from Exiled Online. It has receipts and stuff. So you guys can check that out. If I have come to the wrong conclusion, Ben, you're right.
It's interesting. It's definitely worth looking into. We could put a link to that in the description for the stream. But
the main reason I know about that is I did a lot of work with the Yippie movement over the marijuana march in New York City for a number of years. So the article starts off with a treasure trove of like FBI stuff that on the Yippies that was released.
Fair enough. All right, let's get into it.
But until fairly recently, opposing the importation of low-wage migrants was the consensus position of the Democratic Party and the labor movement. Why? Because an earlier generation of progressives understood that low-wage migration is one of the chief ways by which large employers play nations, populations, and jurisdictions against each other to lower labor costs. It's called corporate arbitrage. Progressives once understood that this kind of migration undercuts the wages of working class people, strains the social services relied upon by the poorest among us, and hinders productivity growth and thus our prosperity as a nation. In this country, going back to our founding, some employers have always preferred to have workers they can utterly dominate. And that's what you get by admitting millions of people who are completely vulnerable to their employers, who can't speak the language, who lack the power to organize. That's why libertarians and Koch brother types in the Wall Street Journal editorial page have always supported open borders. What's curious about our time is that this has become the progressive position. But maybe it isn't so strange. Fact is, low-wage migrant labor sustains the lifestyles of people in my caste, and maybe some of the people in your class. Upper middle class urban knowledge workers who like to pretend we can afford the lifestyles of the old gentry with nannies and gardeners and house cleaners, servants on the cheap. And we can afford such a lifestyle by importing millions of vulnerable, hyper-exploitable workers into the homeland. The difference is the old exploiters were open about what they wanted out of slave or near-slave labor, whereas today's gentry wraps its own advantage-seeking in the garb of humanitarianism. You can support Nick's and Cenk's positions if you wish, but be honest about it. You're supporting mass exploitation. Or you can join Cesar Chavez, Barbara Jordan, Philip Randolph, and many other progressives and labor leaders of the past in supporting tonight's motion. We must shut down the border to corporate arbitrage and exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, probably don't need to spend a ton of time about this because I think anybody who watched the stream last Thursday, a lot of this was kind of anticipated in the discussion at the beginning. My basic take on this is that putting aside the part at the end where you speculate about people's motives, like the strongest part of this is that like there is like a real problem that's being identified here, but I think what we need to resist is like saying that the problem exists, therefore you should support the solution. So it is true, right? That that especially the undocumented labor force is hyper exploited. I mean, no doubt about it, right? Like that this is that in fact, I would say that like it is true that corporate America to a great extent loves the status quo where you have lots of people who are very afraid to do things like organize unions or sue their employers for violating labor laws because they could always be deported, right? Like so that's absolutely true, right? But then like here, the solution or implied solution, right? It wasn't spelled out a lot there, but I mean this is certainly what he's suggesting is okay. Well, the solution is to just like get rid of that labor force, right? Just deport everybody. But I'd object to that for two reasons, right? One is that I think actually doing that, right, would like any serious attempt to do that, right? I mean, like we're talking about deporting like 15 million people. Would just have to involve just
the level of like jackbooted thugs that would have to be sent out is astronomical. I believe that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what I'm getting at, right? So I think that like I would just like object to that, just on principle, right? Like I think that's like a horrible thing to have happen, and I don't want it to happen, right? That's like you're just going to inflict a tremendous amount of human suffering doing that. And also, I don't really think it's going to happen. I think we could like get closer to that than we are now, right? But like, I don't think it's going to happen on that level, right? And so I don't know if it's that practical solution, but like the idea of it being made practical, I think is pretty horrifying, right? Like that's like bundle of objections number one, right? Then like the other thing is like, look, you could say, yes, hyper exploited, undocumented labor force existing, people being very easily dominated, etc. All very true, right? But there are, like recognizing that is consistent with a variety of different possible solutions. And, I would say that giving people a way to become citizens, so they can come out from the shadows, and they're going, they're more empowered to do things like, like join unions and sue their employers and all of that stuff, is just, in every possible way, a better solution to that problem.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think to kind of add on there, one, and actually that's what I immediately wrote down. You were getting at the same thing. Workers are more vulnerable when immigration is restricted because they can't go to the authorities. They can't be found out. So if you want to organize those workers, they need to feel safe. And to feel safe, they need to not be thrown out simply for crossing an imaginary line. So that's issue one. But in a sort of, this actually gets a bit deeper within, I guess, the understanding and the critique of capitalism, because I'm gonna paraphrase the late great David Graeber and his parable of the divided island. Ironically, we were just talking about, right-wing libertarians, and he actually came up with this, like, because he was arguing with ANCAPs on like the proto-internet in the 90s. But what he said, and this was really big, was that imagine you've got an island, and it's populated on one side by, true believers in like kind of anarcho-capitalism, Randian objectivism, that kind of thing. And then you've got the other side that is made up of like left anarchists, like the CNT5, the Zapatistas, most recently, honestly, the YPG/PKK. So let's assume that we've got this island, and there is no border there, because neither one of these groups is particularly statist oriented. Okay, so there's no border. So here's what's probably going to happen according to Graeber. Because the left libertarian side welcomes all comers, and the right libertarian side exploits their workers and to enrich a particularly small class of, for lack of a better word, capitalists or big capitalists, what's going to happen is that the quality of life on the left libertarian side is going to be much better than the quality of life on the right libertarian side. Now, this is key because what's going to happen is then what the workers specifically from that side are going to all go over to the left libertarian side. And suddenly the ANCAPs are going to find themselves without a labor force. And what they're either going to do, and I guarantee you on this, is they're either going to have to erect a barrier and start enforcing borders, or they're going to have to start offering such a good deal to their workers that they might as well be living in the socialist side. So the idea behind this is that to try to build capitalism without borders, it actually doesn't work, specifically because people will go to places where they are better treated and their labor is more valuable. And there's just better rewards for it. So any attempt to build, capitalism is probably going to fall into that unless you have a powerful state to keep that stuff from happening.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, it's easier with an island, right, than all world, because, people, it's hard to move around. But yeah, I definitely get the point. That's interesting. All right, let's keep going. We still have one opening statement to go, and then we should be into the meat of the debate.
Five minutes on the clock. Last up is Cenk Uygur.
Hey guys, wonderful to be here in Texas with you all. Love the food. Who puts fried egg on a chili? I'll tell you who. Geniuses. So first of all, I got news for you guys. Everyone here is descendants of immigrants. So that's of course true. Even if you're a Native American, you started in Central Asia, where my folks also originally started. The Turks went west. You went east, and here you are. On the Mayflower, literally every one of those folks were undocumented immigrants. Where's your papers? I don't see your papers. You did not come here legally if you came from the Mayflower. Now, obviously different rules at the time. Now, guys, we need immigrants. Literally, the entire country, 100% of us are descendants of immigrants. To say that, no, we're not going to do any more immigrants, well, that's preposterous. The only question is, how are we going to do immigration, not whether we're going to do immigration. By the way, if you think it's a great idea to stop anybody else from coming in or going out and close off and let's just stay what we are now, this culture is great. Well, good news for you. The Ming Dynasty agreed almost exactly 500 years ago. That's why they burned all their ships to the ground. It was called the treasure fleet. And the Chinese ships at the time were so dominant. They're about 10 times the size of the European ships. And that's why they were economic giants 500 years ago. And after they burned their ships and didn't have anybody going in or out, a 200-year massive slump. And it destroyed their dynasty. Because closing yourself off from the rest of the world is a recipe for disaster. So let's have a realistic conversation about how do we get people in here and do it the right way. Look, I know that there are real concerns about immigration, especially undocumented immigration. So let's talk about which of those concerns are legitimate and illegitimate. So of course, you're not going to be surprised to find out that I think a lot of it is illegitimate. But I'll surprise you with a couple of opinions. I think some are legitimate. So first of all, on illegitimate. Oh my God, they're criminals and rapists. Said the guy who was indicted 91 times and proven in court to have done sexual assault. So there is a criminal and a rapist. It's the guy who said that comment, okay? Now, but that's an anecdote and that's just one awful human being. But when you look at large, it is a stone cold fact that native-born citizens, and if you're in that category, sorry, but you are the most likely to be criminals. So undocumented immigrants are only half as likely to commit crime as natural-born Americans. And if you're in my group and Sohrab's group of documented immigrants, we're the safest of all. We're a quarter. So that, you know what? That means natural-born Americans are 4 times more likely to commit crime than we are. We're just little teddy bears up here. Okay, so crime is not true. By the way, the gangs are coming, and you watch Fox News. Oh, they're all gangs, right? MS-13. Well, there's documentation, and the number of people who are coming in who are coming from gangs are 0.09%. So that's a mirage. It's literally not true that they are more criminal than the average American. So how about jobs? They're taking our jobs. Are they? We literally have record low unemployment. And this is not a partisan issue. Both under Trump and Biden, except for COVID, obviously, we had really good low unemployment. And if they took all of our jobs, how come unemployment isn't sky high? We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the whole world. They're definitely not taking our jobs. And guys, who are you kidding? Did you all just come from a meat packing plant and they took your jobs? No. Did you all just pick lettuce and then come to the Majestic Theater? No, they're taking the jobs that Americans won't do. In fact, Bush in 2006 said, we're going to get these dastardly undocumented immigrants. They did several raids, and this happens every single time there's a raid. This one was in Stillmore, Georgia. They go and they take out all the immigrants, and guess what happened? the whole town died. It was a small town, about 1,000 people. And once they took out all the undocumented immigrants, the only plant in town collapsed and the entire town collapsed. They've done that about a half a dozen times. That's why they don't do it anymore. And even Trump barely did it because it's a terrible idea. So it's not that. So the legitimate part is that, yes, when people came to the border towns, then it was a mess. And that's not fair to the border towns. And in fact, when Governor Abbott first decided to do the buses to the northern cities, I surprised a lot of people on the Young Turks when I said, that's a really good idea. Politically, it was a really good idea. But on top of that, I said, why should the border states carry all of the pain? Why shouldn't it also go to the cities? And if you live in a blue city, as I do, and you really believe in immigration, then you shouldn't have any problem with it. And people are like, well, you can't say that. Whoa. So it turns out you don't want them either, right? So now why am I telling you that when I'm pro-immigration? Because the problem, guys, yeah, I get it. When you put a whole bunch of new people into a new place, yes, will sometimes crime go up? They don't know where to go, etc. Why, though? Is it because of the nature of who they are? We know through the stats that it is definitely not the nature of who they are. It's because we don't have a rational immigration system. Do you know how many, the immigrants are coming, giant invasions. Do you know how many immigrants we let in as a percentage of the country every year? 0.2%. It's tiny. If those same people came in a documented way and we got them, a pathway to jobs, housing, etc., then they wouldn't be milling around in Chicago and New York and the border states, etc. They would do this in an orderly fashion. And I'm way out of time.
You are.
So I've got so much more to say.
We're going to get into it right now.
Yes. So let's think.
Okay. Thank you. Let's do a quick round robin of rebuttals. And maybe let's start with you. And maybe just as a prompt, Nick accused you of nativism, but also of nostalgia for an imagined past. You talked about how pre-1970, the people were smarter. Maybe they were taller, better looking. Certainly my great-grandparents weren't. So speak to that issue. Are you nostalgic for an imagined past? And obviously pick up on any arguments that the opposing side put out.
Oh, no, it's just simply a fact that pre-1970 immigrants weren't being supported by the welfare state. They went back. And also,
what percentage
people
of current immigrants
Please
go
don't
back?
interrupt me.
Go
I'm
ahead.
begging you. They act like we're King Canute trying to hold back the tide. No, the 1965 Act was specifically designed to bring in the third world and to stop people coming who had populated this country, who had built this country. Side note, I don't know if it makes you all feel happy to say we're a nation of immigrants and we're all descended of immigrants, fine, but it's not true unless you mean it in the sense that we're all descended from Adam and Eve, so we all came from someplace. You couldn't immigrate here before there was an established society, there was an American established colony, and then it became a country and fought the revolution. And as of 1990, half of Americans still trace their ancestry back to those original Americans. It wasn't America before they got here.
Nick?
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that.
Well, I can throw
yeah,
in, I can throw
please.
in another question for you.
Because the fact is 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 5 people on this panel don't trace their heritage back to the revolution or anything like that. So we trace our heritage back, or Barry and I do, to laws that were passed that kept out our ancestors at a particular moment in time. In 1924, it was over. If you were Italian, if you were Jewish, coming from Europe, you weren't coming into the country anymore.
So, Anne, what is your cutoff when you're thinking about an immigrant? Who qualifies?
Look,
and who doesn't?
I don't care if I'm just saying what this business about we're a nation of immigrants and we're all descended from immigrants. I'm just saying it's simply not true. And yes,
No,
it was bad that
true.
it was
that's
bad
a
that
defiance of reality.
it was bad that FDR turned the shipload of Jews away. Of course it was. Does that mean we have to wreck our country over this? It's also absolutely 100% not true that immigrants commit fewer crimes. This is fiddling with the numbers. There's one famous Cato study where they looked at Texas's prison and they counted immigrants illegal immigrants who had been caught and fingerprinted by the border police, because when they're first putting them in prison, that's the only thing they know. Wait a year, and they find out all those others are also illegals. So they were counting as citizens someone who couldn't already be identified as an illegal. Look at the most wanted lists in places like Los Angeles, well, any hotbed of immigration. Look at one place, I mean, this is why I wrote Adios America, because the government lies to us. They will not tell us. Just give us a breakdown on immigrant, illegal immigrant, citizens in or legal immigrant in our prisons, arrested, convicted. They won't tell us that, and I notice my side is the side asking for it. Prisons, I just want to make one last point on this. Prisons need to know the ethnicity of who's in prison because of the gang fights. They keep records, and look at the records. It is the top 20 groups in New York are all from Latin America. You have to get down to like the 40.
Very quickly, we would have less crime in America if the Kennedy family had been kept out. I will grant that.
You guys might agree on that
Okay.
issue. I want to pick up.
But I want to point out about crime and things like that. First off, even with the recent increases that happened during the pandemic, when immigration stopped in the country, we saw a rise in crime. So you would think illegals not coming into the country and crime rising. That's peculiar, right? And in any case, when I was suggesting that Anne was living in a past, or the crime rates in America now are much lower than they were 20, 30 years ago. So to focus on crime when we're talking about immigration seems to me to be a gigantic red herring.
I would like to put to you guys an issue that Sohrab raised, which is this issue of wage suppression, because I am.
Okay, since they're about to switch gears to a different issue, this seems like a good time to pause.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I respect that she used King Newt. You can tell I'm into like Viking history, so that's good reference there. I don't think anyone who listens to you is going to get that, but I got it, Anne. But yeah, I mean, absolutely everything that Anne said right there was either a lie or a conflation. I have dealt with arguments from like literal fascists over and over again, like on Modern Day Debate, for instance, where they talk about specifically crime statistics. Now, I don't think your audience needs to hear this, but honestly, it is immigration and race are not drivers of crime. What is a driver of crime is poverty. And when you control for poverty, both the crime rates in the cities and the crime rates like in the country are about the same. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, I wanted to talk a little bit really quickly about Cenk. So there were a couple things. One, I loved the joke he opened with, even though he is obviously some kind of moral monster if he's eating eggs on chili. But you could already get the laughter. He's already winning the crowd over. His rhetoric through this was absolutely phenomenal. I did, however, catch that when he's talking about bringing the illegal immigrants into cities. Okay. I think that that's a great idea in the sense that, liberals should have to, put their money where their mouth is. But also, how are the immigrants going to pay the rent in these cities? So economically, that doesn't make sense. So it won over a lot of the crowd. People were really happy to hear that, but it's not a real solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was really bothered by the busing of immigrants. It was obviously very effective political theater, but I mean, I think it's gross to use people as political theater. But of course, the reason it was effective political theater is because, it really did sort of play up the fact that we have, that like in a certain sense, the system is broken, that, that people at border towns, don't necessarily have the resources to, to deal with this, and sort of saying, essentially, see how you like it. Right. Like did dramatize that point. Right. Like, I mean, we obviously need like a ton more asylum judges, for example, right. To process people in a more reasonable way. But yeah, I mean, I think that the concern you're raising at the end there is exactly the right one, right? That it's that, you know, if you're just sort of putting somebody in, you know, New York or Chicago to make a political point, and then they have all the problems that they had in El Paso, except now they've got the extra one of being in a much more expensive place, right? Like, so, you know, really I mean, the real thing is that, you know, I mean, it's not, you know, Sohrab is opening, right? Use the phrase mass irregular migration, right? But of course, there are two components there. There's mass and there's irregular, right? Like those two can come apart, right? Like you can, you know, you can say, like, you can regularize the flow of immigrants without trying to keep people out, right? You know, saying, you know, like here, like setting up a system to process them, and then do things like funnel people into housing and, you know, and all of that stuff, right? You know, and again, this is where the Nick Gillespie position, I think, is really kind of depraved, right? You know, it's like, I don't want to build a wall out over the welfare state. I actually think that immigrants and asylum seekers, you know, understandably, right, you know, need more help when they first show up, right? And then, you know, and then over the course of time, right, you know, people can become integrated into the economy and pay into the system, you know, for everybody else. So yeah, I'm totally on the same page as you on that one. My only other two thoughts about the Cenk part were, one, I'm, you know, even though I think he's on the side of the Angels here, I'm not crazy about the argument that, you know, immigrants are doing the jobs that Americans don't want. It's like, well, yeah, Americans don't want them at those wages and in those conditions, right? You know, but the wages and conditions aren't like etched into the fabric of reality, right? Those are things that are up for social negotiation, right? So I think we want to be really careful about making that kind of argument. And
this is where a progressive critique ends and a leftist anti-capitalist critique begins. It's that extra piece that the liberals almost never acknowledge, because that would be inconvenient.
And then my only other comment on Cenk is I would totally try the fried egg on the chili. That's you know, put a little bit of hot sauce on the top. You know, I'm just saying. I mean, I've never had that, but you know, if we were at a restaurant and that were on the menu, I would absolutely disgust you by ordering it.
Yeah. It's funny. I will normally eat whatever weird thing I can get my hands on. Iceland, I had like puffin and like fermented shark. But for some reason, egg on chili? No. I'm going to conduct an entire like crusade to remove that.
All right, fair enough. You know, I don't know. There's a lot of good sort of spicy plus egg, you know, dishes. You know.
Oh yeah, hot sauce and eggs is amazing.
Yeah. You know, huevos. You know, is the like chilaquiles. You know, there's you know, it's a lot of, you know. So anyway, I wouldn't necessarily bash that a priori. You know, I'd at least try it. But in any case, I think on the Ann Coulter stuff, I think the only thing I would have to add to what you said earlier is that I'm real suspicious whenever people say, oh, this like study was bad, and then what I want you to do, and then they don't have like a different study they could point to instead, right? Like what they have is like, oh, look at the most wanted list, right? Like it's like, yeah, this is, you know, this really stinks of like you're just trying to divert us from like data to anecdotes because you think that you have a better case there.
I was a little disappointed with Cenk actually not going a little bit further into MS-13 because in particular the problem that created MS-13 was immigration and racism. Like originally MS-13 was not a gang. it was essentially people who had come up from Guatemala, I believe it was, or Honduras, one of those, but who had come up and specifically were trying to integrate into American society and were helping each other out. That unfortunately,
but it was like, yes, I mean, MS-13 now obviously is like really, really bad, but like also this, we're talking in this case about like, like something became a gang, like a gang was formed in the U.S., right? It was like actually exported from the United States, to countries south of the border, not the other way around, right? Which is not a small distinction originally.
That's ironically, that's how a lot of organized crime starts. You can even just go back, watch the old Godfather movies and such, and you'll see what they're talking about. Like what the mobsters want is the American dream. But they're shut out of it oftentimes for racial reasons in the case of Italians prior to now, but also, in these other gangs that we have going on. It's people are turning to a gray and black market because they cannot function within the white market, specifically because there are doors closed to them based only on who they are and not what they're actually capable of doing. And that kind of frustration obviously is going to boil over into violence if it becomes intense enough and is sustained for a long enough time.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true in some cases. Although, yeah, I mean, like without without minimizing how bad the end result is. Yeah, that's fair. All right, let's watch the wage part.
Hang on. There's one other thing I wanted to point out really, really quickly.
Yep.
This was like, guys, if you're listening for a way to debate or to, engage in specifically in persuasive speech, Cenk acknowledging the problems with immigration, that is key. That is 100% key. The number one complaint that people have against folks that they're arguing with is they don't listen. So when you show people that you are willing to listen to them, that is honestly, one, it's a power move, but two, it makes it more likely they will actually think about what you're saying rather than just see you as an enemy. So full marks on that, Cenk.
Yeah, no, to strongly agreed on that. I actually frustrates the shit out of me a lot of times when I see leftists who do debates who are convinced, that like if they ever concede anything about anything, that'll like make them look weak or something. And, so it's like if you're, even if the question is like, should abortion rights extend up to like 11, to 8 months and 28 days, that like they just can't like say any, they can't like concede anything. They can't admit to being unsure about anything. And I think not only do you not need to do that, it's actually really bad for your ability to win anybody over, right? Like for exactly the reason you're saying. I mean, I think conceding things when it's reasonable to concede them actually makes you look really good, and yeah, you should do that. But
imagine that you guys have different perspectives on it. Cenk is a progressive, Nick is a libertarian. Is it true that immigrants, legal or illegal, suppress wages of the middle and working classes in this country?
Yeah, it depends. So first of all, as a populist progressive, I can't stand the corporate rule that we live under. So part of the reason that we have this problem in the first place, guys, is because the companies want cheap labor. And so, and that's part of the reason why our vegetables are so cheap and our food is cheap and et cetera. And so they don't, if we had an efficient system, well, then they would have to pay people more, and they don't want that. There's a reason why it's broken. Almost everything in this country is because of campaign contributions. And when corporations give money, the politicians do as they're told. And in this case, they're told, don't fix it. So I understand that. But at the same time, what I've seen, and as a progressive, I care a lot about higher wages for Americans, is that none of the fear-mongering came to pass. We did not have huge unemployment. We didn't lose our jobs. The wages were not related to that at all. And you've seen the meta studies, and they show that they're not related. So the things that wages are related to are, for example, is there a higher minimum wage? Does that push up other wages? corporate power. You see, from 1938 to 1978, productivity in America was sky high, and our wages matched it. It was terrific. Then the Supreme Court legalized bribery and allowed corporate contributions. From then on, your productivity still soars, but your wages flatline. It's because of corporate power. It has nothing to do with the immigrants. And in fact, waves and waves of immigrants have absolutely proven that to be the case.
But Cenk,
Yes,
can I
Sohrab, go
intervene on a couple of things? Because everyone just vaguely suggested studies, and I just want to go through some of them in a granular way. So I just heard a few things from the other side. One was Americans just won't do certain jobs. Now think about this. In the sectors where immigrants are most represented, especially illegal immigrants, you're talking about dry cleaning and laundry, building maintenance, apparel manufacture, landscaping, private household work. At most in each of these sectors, migrant labor is about 20%. So that means that there are plenty of non-migrant Americans, legal migrants or American domestic workers who work these jobs. It is not true that we won't do them. So when farmers, ranchers, and developers complain that they can't find American workers, what they mean is they can't find American workers willing to work serf-like conditions. So another point, that Americans just won't do these jobs. If that's the case, then why do Disney and some tech firms have their own current domestic workforce train their H-1B visa replacements and then usher them out of the way? Those people, those Americans, were happy to work those jobs. So in all the areas where we have low migrant populations, that includes like certain black neighborhoods and places like Appalachia, you will find non-migrants doing the jobs that migrants do in high migration areas. So it is not true that Americans don't do certain jobs. Can I do one more?
Well, let's,
Because I was the only one who kept to the 5 minutes.
okay, one more.
Okay.
And he's so prepared. It's like breaking my heart. Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
One more.
All right. So you heard of that. We all benefit as consumers. It's good for us as consumers. So if lowering the prices of goods and services by lowering wages, including through labor arbitrage, which is immigration, is such a great idea, why not help all Americans just constantly lower their wages? Not just the ones who have to compete with migrant labor. Why not legalize child labor? It would definitely lower consumer prices.
Actually, the Republicans are trying.
So they also say we all benefit as consumers. No, that's a statistical trick. Some Americans make gains, but they treat it as gains made by all Americans. If you hire a serf to clean your house at a discount rate, how do I, as a consumer in general, benefit from that? You're the one who got your house clean at a discount because of a vulnerable migrant. So why don't we generalize the harms to workers, which is definitely to some classes of workers, and that's the non-college majority that are most at risk by illegal immigration and offshoring. Those are the classes of Americans that are most at risk from these practices. If we generalize the benefits as consumers, why don't we generalize how we think about the harms to those classes, the non-college majority in this country?
Okay, one of the things that I'm surprised.
If I may just,
Hey, Nick, 30 seconds, and then I want to go to national
there's a
security.
broad consensus that cheap labor hurts non-high school graduates in the labor force, which is a shrinking and small part of the labor force. So that would be a place where if low-skill, low-wage workers have problems, then you help them. You help them retrain, you help them with certain types of bonus payments and things like that. When you talk about immigrants acting like serfs, ask them, why do they come here? Why do illegal people, we're not even talking about legal people, and Jimmy John's, by the way, the sandwich shop in Texas, is paying people $20 an hour to make sandwiches. That is not slavery, that is not serfdom, that is not anything terrible. And you can ask about illegal immigrants who come to the border, they get caught, they get sent back to Mexico. They come back again, and they come back again. Are they coming back again because they want to be exploited and they want to live in poverty? Or it's because what they have in America is better than that? They are not being exploited. They are building a future for themselves, and it is not coming out of the mouth of Americans.
As Barbara Jordan, again, a Democrat, as her commission,
when was she saying that?
In the late 90s, but the principle doesn't change. yes, if you have conditions in which you're surviving on $1 or less than $1 a day, of course, whatever you put before people is going to be the jobs they find here is advantageous to them. That's understandable. But the fact is that what we're saying is we're telling our native workers that they have to get used to surf-like conditions, because you have a class of workers who won't go to OSHA if they face unsafe conditions, and that happens horrifically in the meatpacking industry.
Your argument,
They won't go to like the National Labor Relations Board when there's wage theft, and that happens horrifically with
Point made.
migrants.
I want to talk about. I'm shocked that this far into the conversation, national security came up in no one statement. And one of the things one of the things.
Okay, before we get to national security, I want to just say, like, that, I'm not going to repeat the stuff that I said earlier about, Sohrab's argument, but just to like put a little bow on it, maybe, right? It's like, yeah, you're right. Like, undocumented workers are not going to complain to OSHA about like rampant safety violations, the meatpacking industry. And so one thing we could
with that, make them documented.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, yeah, because you can say, well, let's just try to do this like unprecedentedly massive, again, I don't know how you round up and deport 15 million people just trying to like keep their heads down and live their lives without that getting pretty crystal knockedy, but like that's like, you could try to do that, right? Or you could give people give people a way to become citizens, so they are going to be emboldened to go to OSHA and go to the National Labor Relations Board and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll further go that I said this last time. Immigration, all forms of immigration, overall is an economic driver, because all of those people who are coming, not only are they paying into the system because they're illegal and not taking anything out because you can't, because they don't have a social security number or anything like that. But not only that, but also those are all people who need services. They're going to need to go to a doctor when they're sick. They're going to need to get food on their own. So all of that drives the economy and makes more jobs. And those jobs, sometimes they're out of one sector or another, and we can find a way to deal with that. But overall, it is a net benefit to allow open borders. I think the freaking world's like 78 trillion was the number that I saw before the pandemic. So yeah, I would say like what I don't like about his argument is not that he's wrong. It's that he's zoomed in on one very particular part.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Things that's known is that people are coming through the Darien Gap from all over the world. They're coming from China, they're coming from Russia, they're coming from Syria, they're coming from Egypt, they're coming from Mauritania, they're coming from everywhere. And we don't know who those people are. How much of a concern is that for those of you on the stage? Maybe Cenk, let's start with you.
Zero, none.
Why?
Okay, so let's talk
Because
about
you
reality.
hate America.
Yeah,
Right?
let's talk about reality.
Because
So-
that to me seems like the thing that has radicalized a lot of people on this issue.
Yeah, they're empirically incorrect. So first of all, Fox News will demagogue and go, "Oh my God, there was a prayer rug. There's a Muslim guy coming." First of all, what does that even mean? So there's a Muslim guy coming in. Why don't you just tell me you're a bigot? Like, I'm not saying you guys. I'm saying Fox News. That doesn't prove a goddamn thing. What does it prove? Oh, there's a prayer rug. And it turns out, of course, it's not. So how many terrorists have come in through the border and then done a massive plot against us? To my knowledge, zero. Zero. Okay, do you know how many people have done mass shootings in America? Tons and tons and tons. Are we kidding ourselves? The mass shootings that happen every single day, the massacre after massacre. And yes, that's all of us, the people that live in America. There's not this demagoguing about national security is nonsense. If you're talking about national security and giving away our secrets, the real threats come. They are super rich. They come on planes. There are spies. Look, it's bipartisan. The Chinese spy who slept with Eric Swalwell. This Chinese spy. It's true. The
That,
Chinese.
by the way, is work that an American won't do.
And by the way, the Chinese spy that was caught at Mar-a-Lago. All you got to do is walk into Mar-a-Lago.
Okay,
you get all
now
the secrets.
James says he has zero concern for national security. And Sohrab, want to jump
Well,
in?
I have a few terrorist attacks that were done by immigrants. 9/11, the Orlando
Did they come
shooting,
across the border?
San.
That's not true at all.
Go ahead, Ann.
Again, who was talking there? I don't care if they came across the border. San Bernardino. Oh, and by the way, it's hard to figure these things out because one of the San Bernardino terrorists, as well as the Orlando Pulse nightclub terrorist, was born in America. So the media 100% described them as American man, American man. Yes, it's the apple-cheeked boy next door. How did this happen? Homegrown. The Boston bombers. And how did they get in? Family reunification. They had some uncle someplace who had come in. Basically, every terrorist attack you can think of. Oh, the Times Square bomber, the first World Trade Center bombing. All of them, they were illegal immigrants under the Agricultural Adjustment Act in the 1965 immigration law that allowed agricultural workers to stay, and they would just lie. The INS knew that 90% of them were fake and just let them in anyway. So those are a few committed by immigrants.
Sohrab, earlier.
But I've got to say, literally none of those people crossed the border. Literally
If
none.
you're
Nick
talking,
Cares?
but no, but if what we're
That's what we're
talking
talking
about,
about.
you were talking
It's
about
worse that they come in legally.
you were talking about national security concerns on the southern border from people pouring in. First off, as Cenk was talking about, the 9/11 bombers who are front of mind on all of this got visas and permits. They flew first class. They were not coming across the border. In any case, this is a reason to have an actual working pathway where you can vet people as opposed to have, a rush of people who are all coming at the same time and overwhelming any kind of process. If the process starts back in their home countries, you can have a more manageable border and you can actually check people at the door rather than it being like a Who concert or something like
They
that.
were vetted. The Boston Marathon bombers, San Bernardino,
So
Orlando,
then-
they were
Yeah,
all vetted.
that's
Our
not the
immigration
question
system
in
said,
front of us.
welcome.
Okay.
No,
So
now
earlier-
now
earlier-
hold on. Now you're talking about documented immigrants, right? So I came in the same way. My uncle's
I'm
a
talking about
doctor, came
immigrants.
in, and then and what did I do? It goes right to your opening statement, Barry, which is okay. Then my dad came in and he started a company, hired hundreds of Americans, helped the American economy, wonderfully productive. Then I started a company, I hired hundreds of Americans. So you mentioned two, Sacramento, I believe, and the Boston bombers, and they didn't come across the border. And how about the hundreds of other terrorist attacks? How about the synagogue shootings? How about Pittsburgh? How about the shooting down in El Paso? How about literally thousands of shootings? And you have two documented immigrants and none that cross the border illegally.
There are
Sohrab,
not
go ahead, jump in.
thousands.
Well, Norm Macdonald had this great tweet about rest in
A
peace.
Canadian, by the way, I'll point out.
That's right. He said,
Yeah.
he said if a Muslim explodes a dirty bomb that kills 50 million people, what I'd worry about is the backlash that the peaceful Muslims face. And I'm going to make a point similar to that, which is yes, right now we haven't had cases of people coming through the southern border endangering the homeland, but it takes one for it to happen, and then you will see this country impose genuinely unreasonable solutions. In other words, if the security threat that is incipient at the border is not addressed, then you will get the ugly solutions, right? So, and I don't want the ugly solutions because I don't want,
And,
So,
and
hold on.
I want to pick up on one
I
thing.
gotta say something about
Earlier in this conversation, Anne suggested that we should bring people in that are better than us, taller, thinner, better looking, higher IQ. Trump said something sort of similar a few days ago. He talked about how we should bring in people from nice countries like.
Okay. I don't know if you've got anything. I think that on this, calling balls and strikes here, I think Nick Gillespie in particular actually nailed it here. Like I don't really have anything to add.
I mean, I agree. I had a couple of things. One, if you're worried about crime and terrorism, you know what you don't want to do? Get your entire police force busy grabbing people who are just here to work. If there is a process to bring them in, I agree, that maybe there might be a good idea to arrange something like that to, for instance, vet people. I really feel like we are shooting ourselves in the foot when we command the state to keep people out who have committed no crimes other than possibly crossing an imaginary line, and the vast majority of them are going to be less prone to criminality than the general population. They want to keep their heads down. They want to fit in here. So that's the first thing. The other thing, oh, by the way, Appalachia. It's Appalachian when you're talking about the mountains or the trail. It is Appalachia when you were talking about the region. I don't think there are that many. It's a poor region, but I don't think there are that many undocumented immigrants there. You get more of those in like South Central and.
Well, I think that was his point actually about Appalachia. He was bringing it up as an example. At least the only reference to Appalachia I heard and all that, right? He was bringing it up as an example of an area that doesn't have very many migrants, but nevertheless, there are people who are willing to do these jobs.
I just heard Appalachian, and I guess I got triggered.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, look, I think your first point is absolutely right. I mean, this is, if you are concerned, and again, it is notable, like, and Coulter is, it's a little hard to tell what she's even advocating here, but to
be honest, her arguments are not particularly different than the arguments that I'd get from the Jeffrey Epstein funded JF Garrett Pay. It's the same kind of stuff. It's just she's more general than they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So but I mean, Anne, I guess, thinks that we also shouldn't allow legal immigration, or we shouldn't allow legal immigration from, anywhere except for Sweden, maybe. But so then I guess her examples are more relevant. But on the original question, right? I think, as Nick and Cenk both pointed out, there are no actual examples of people who come over the southern border of committed terrorism. And if you want to be concerned about the incipient problem, that there's a potential there, right? That's a place that somebody could come in to commit a terrorist attack, as was suggested at the end of the discussion, by Sohrab, then I think Nick Gillespie's point is exactly right? It's like, look, which is essentially what you just said, right? That I'm not adding anything to what you just said, but I mean, if you, if you're concerned about hey, what's going to be an easier job for law enforcement, right? Where is it going to be easier for, if you have all the border patrol is interested in doing is just checking who's who and processing everybody as they come in, but they're not really hassling people, unless there's a reason to, then that frees up a lot of resources for anybody who actually is a concern. And again, if you're interested in the purely hypothetical, but sure, let's go with it for the sake of argument, the purely hypothetical possibility of Al-Qaeda style terrorists, or the much more distinct possibility of cartels and stuff, right? Any of that stuff. That's it's gonna be a lot easier for those people to blend into a big mass of people being smuggled in, or coming in, through unsupervised horde of entries than it would be if those were the only people trying to come in illegally, because everybody else could just go through an orderly process, a la Ellis Island.
One of the things that I was actually very disappointed in Cenk for not bringing this up, and that's Oklahoma City. I mean, Oklahoma City was the single largest terror attack in the United States until 9/11, and that was done by a fascist. So yeah, that's the one thing. The other two that I just wanted to get to very quickly is, the first one is the argument that's going on right now between, I think, the libertarian guy and the like Catholic conservative guy is that he's saying they are being exploited, and he is saying they are building a future for themselves. It's both. They're being exploited and they are building a future for themselves. And I really hate when we have these false dichotomies because it prevents communication on the issue. You know, you can still be exploiting someone and like still that's the best possible option they have right now. It's not ethical.
In fact, I mean, look, all exploitation under capitalism more or less is like that, right? Like that's you know, but of course, this is the sort of big ideological blinder with Nick Gillespie that obviously he can't, you know, like it's obvious enough why he's not going to acknowledge that. But like, yeah, that's like, look, I mean, are you going to deny, like, even if you want to like have some super rose-tinted view of contemporary American capitalism, like, are you going to deny that like the kind of factories that, you know, I don't know, in like Dickens novels or, you know, that, you know, William Blake is referring to in Jerusalem, you know, where he calls the you know, dark satanic mills, you know, like where people are working for like, you know, 14, 15 hours a day, you know, and like look, all of those people are volunteers, right? Like nobody was like being forced at gunpoint to do that. In fact, a very potent way of disciplining workers who got out of hand was the threat of being fired, right? I mean, that's so yeah. I mean, exactly what you said, right? That it's very, very frequently the case that people are, I mean, you know, not just in the sort of like, you know, Marxist way of using the word exploitation, where in which case I would just say like, yeah, I think, you know, everybody who's doing wage labor under capitalism is being exploited, right? But even in a sort of looser, more emotive sense of exploitation, right? Like, you know, you just mean like severely mistreated or something like that. Like even in that sense, right? People are exploited and also accepting that as the best option for them out of the options that have been made available to them all the time. Again, that's generally how any sort of exploitation that doesn't involve literal slavery or feudalism works that way.
Mm-hmm. To jump back really quickly also, there was an argument that I saw, and I may have sort of misconstrued exactly what he was saying, but I believe it's the Gillespie guy. That's the conservative. So
Gillespie is the guy in the leather jacket. That's the Reason Magazine guy. Ahmari is the guy in the suit. You could see him sitting next to Coulter, right? Like that's the you know, whatever you want to call him. That's the, you know, it's the Compact Magazine guys. So it's like economically leftish, but like Catholic and conservative in lots of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the nerd.
Okay, the nerd. Yeah. Let's go with that. Sohrab, if you're watching this, keep going.
Yeah, no, I like him a lot actually. Like he comes across as, I think he's very wrong on a lot of things, but he comes across as at least caring and you know, genuine, which is way more than you can say for Coulter. So he made an argument about like, why don't we expand out all of the different like if it's good for immigrants to come here and work our field jobs, why don't we just expand that out and have them take everybody's jobs throughout the economy and drive down everyone's wages. I'm going to quote Thoughtslime here. Yes, if it's good to have a hamburger, you must eat the entire cow. Like, I hate this argument because it sounds intuitive, but it's just taking something to the nth degree for no reason. And that's never going to happen because immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, if they're coming from, you know, South America and Central America, they're going to have a very particular set of skills. So it's not like you can like, you know, I'm sure some of them you could sit them down and do coding, but the vast majority are going to be taking the kinds of jobs that their skills happen to have. So it's not only is it a bad illogical argument, but it's something that physically could not happen even if we wanted to try to make it happen.
So I'm going to see if I can steel man this, because I think I was trying to remember that argument, and I feel like he said something like, because like what it was directed against was the idea that it benefits all of us consumers because we have, you know, cheaper products. And so one way of understanding the counter argument is, well, look, there are lots of things we wouldn't be okay with, you know, because they lead to cheaper products, right? You know, so the fact that this leads to cheaper products, you know, shouldn't be a particularly powerful reason for us to support it. So, you know, he mentioned like, you know, re-legalizing child labor, right? You know, is something that would, you know, which
the Reason magazine guy probably wants.
yeah, totally, right. And it's like I think that's I think that like there's a narrow way of understanding it where I think that's right. I think that the like the fact that, you know, again, I'm not super comfortable arguing in favor of you know, immigration by saying that immigrant labor is cheaper, which is essentially what the products are cheaper argument boils down to, right? You know, like I would like labor in general to be much more expensive, but and you know, and I think ultimately, I also just don't really buy the idea that that the you know, that the cheap labor, you know, I think ultimately supply and demand, right, for at the consumption side, right, you know, is going to have much more to do with fixing prices in the long term, but in any case.
I think you're 100% right with it. It is supply and demand that determines wages more than anything else.
Yeah, you know, prices anyway. You know, prices, right? Yeah, but yeah, that's look. I think that it's not so yeah, fair enough, right? But like, but also, I mean, to the thought slime claim that you know, like analogy that you quoted. You know, it's like, yeah, look, also though, right? Like, I just don't think it's, you know, I just don't think it's bad in itself to let people come in, you know, who want to like peacefully move around and, you know, and get the best deal for themselves, you know, that they can, right? I think that's, you know, I mean, I think the sort of baseline is that that's fine, right? So it's like, you know, if you're saying, well, that produces certain benefits, and doing all this other stuff would produce the certain benefits. But it's like, yeah, okay, but that other stuff could just be worse to do, right, than this, right? Like this could be intrinsically fine. And yeah, that's also, I actually like the Burger Cow line a lot. I'm gonna remember that and use it in the future. But you don't have anything else? Let's watch the next bit.
Denmark, Norway, Switzerland, they have something in common. Sohrab, you and I are from, well, I mean, when my ancestors came here, they were not considered white. Sohrab, you come from a country, Iran, that is not considered a nice country. If you could wave a magic wand, like what is your ideal policy? Do you and Anne have some daylight on you on that?
So if you listen to Anne and if you have a certain point of view, you might think, wow, what horrible things she's saying. But again, I want to go back to the Barbara Jordan Commission. It was a really important document at the time. It was commissioned by the Clinton administration. And she more or less said what Anne said, which is we want skills-based immigration. In other words, it has to be cases where there's a need in the labor market rather than just flooding the country and harming Americans without high school education or just a high school education. And she mentioned the reunification methods, right? Where she said it has to be limited to the nuclear family. And that's what Barbara Jordan said, to prioritize the nuclear family if you're gonna have reunification, rather than like cousins and so on, and ever more distant, attenuated from the nuclear family. So I actually think a lot of what Anne said, I would sign up for as well. So that's what I would do. And yes, and I'll tell you one more thing. I came through the family reunification. I am a chain migrant. And so some people might say, well, how dare you then oppose other people who seek to gain entry into the United States the same way? And what I say to that is that Now my allegiance is to the well-being and common good of this country, and therefore not to the general class of potential migrants out there who would be clamoring to get in. So I think that's a perfectly fair position for an immigrant to take.
Okay. Let's go to Cenk, and then I want to talk a little bit about the politics on this issue, because as we were coming down here to Dallas, big news broke that President Biden is sort of eyeing an executive order that could take hold as soon as this month that would dramatically limit asylum seekers from entering the country. And it's a very, very different position than where his presidency began. Of course, within the first hours of his presidency, he was rolling back what he called Trump's draconian immigration policies. Now he's ending up maybe
to his
somewhere.
credit, he has no idea what he was thinking then.
So, Cenk, jump in, but I kind of want you guys to touch on the politics of this. The one last thing I'll add is that we had a fabulous story in the Free Press a few weeks ago by Olivia Reingold that talked about 7 lawsuits being brought in the city of Chicago, almost all by people of color, including from a DEI consultant on the South Side named, I think, Darnell Jones, who said they're giving things away to migrants that we've been deprived of in a poor Black community. So speak to the politics of this a little bit.
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with her, and I'll come back to that. You're not going to get me to defend Joe Biden too much. I ran against him. So I'll come back to that too. But I've got to address 2 things. First of all, when I said national security threat is 0, there was gasps in the room. And let's just note for the record that the debate concluded with, well, what if there's one later? So that just literally happened. That was Sohrab's point. Okay. Now on this idea of, but the bad countries are sending people in. What do you, like when the Irish and the Italian and the Jews were coming in, do you think that they were coming from great, amazing countries? At the time, the Irish were starving. They had the Great Potato Famine. They were so poor. The Italians were poor, and the Jews were poor. They lived in the worst parts of New York, etc. And we want to close it off. If we had done that completely and closed it off to those immigrants, it wouldn't be the America that we know and love today. And by the way, it might not even be America. The Jewish physicists driven out of Germany came to America, and we won World War II because of them. If we had done Coulter's strategy at that time, we might not even exist.
We
That's
were doing
idea.
Coulter's strategy. It was pre-1970.
And Cenk, you're a
Oh, that's such a convenient thing to say.
Cenk, you're a progressive. Between 1923 and 1965, you had the period of restriction of immigration, and that was the period when you had the highest union density in this country. That's the 30 glorious years. That's the New Deal order, and it coincided with pretty strictly controlled immigration.
Totally conflating 2 different issues. So corporate power becomes supersized in 1978 after the Supreme Court decisions of Bellotti and Buckley v. Vallejo. So we had a golden period of 38 to 78. We had plenty of immigrants at that point in different parts of that period. The immigrant does not jive with that. The story you're telling. It's actually all about corporate power, and why we were doing so well is because we had power in a democracy, the American people. If you cut off all of these countries based on this arbitrary 1970 rule, right? Oh, well, yeah, it's inconvenient because everybody that came pre-1970 is about 98% of the country, right? But these guys, the Latinos, they're not good, and the new immigrants are not good because they're coming from really poor countries and they're not helping.
Okay,
but the Irish and the Italians and the Jews and everyone else from really poor
informal
countries.
That's great sort of informal reasoning.
Sohrab, 30 seconds, then
Okay.
Nick, 30
And
seconds.
Sohrab, you concede that it does not affect employment at all. Record low unemployment. You have to concede that.
30 seconds, then Nick.
So that's your anecdote. Here's what the labor economist, the preeminent economist of labor, the relation between labor unionism and immigration said. That's Vernon Briggs. Membership in American unions has over time moved inversely with trends in the size of immigration inflows. And here's what Cesar Chavez said, which is why Cesar Chavez always reported illegal immigrants to the authorities. He said, the illegal aliens are doubly exploited. First, because they are farm workers, and second, because they are powerless to defend their interests. But if there were no illegals used to break our strikes, then we could win those battles.
So
that's as old school a labor figure as you can imagine.
Make them legal. Okay, make them legal, and then suddenly they're not under the rock and they're not under the boot of
The
unsavory
problem is
people.
the more heterogeneous the workplace, it becomes harder to organize.
The other thing is that private sector unionization peaked in the early to mid 50s. It's a product of industrialization. That era is over. Okay, and American workers are actually gaining in wages and compensation. If I may come back to your other point, the problem with Chicago and Chicago City Services isn't illegal immigrants. It is generations of terrible city government, okay? And a welfare state that is completely out of control. The same thing in New York. You know, it breaks my heart when Eric Adams says we can't handle 50,000 illegal immigrants coming into New York or something like that. You're telling me a city of 8.5 million people.
Martha's Vineyard couldn't handle any either.
No, you know, and I would point out, unlike, you know, those people, I've never been to Martha's Vineyard. I would like to get on a bus sometime and I guess drive there or swim there. No, but more importantly,
I don't think you could take a bus there.
We do need to restrain welfare spending in general. And there's no question that in a place like New York, because of a court ruling, there is a right to shelter, et cetera. And it doesn't just extend to illegal or asylum seekers or anything. It's to all people. That is terrible. It's one of the reasons why New York State and especially New York City has trouble competing in, you know, against places like Texas and Florida.
Okay, could I respond to that?
Yes, please.
You can write off Chicago and New York as just being, oh, it's just big government. And you can try to say, put a wall around welfare. Yeah, right after you repeal the law of gravity. That's not happening. But I can give at least two very, very big counterexamples. Minnesota, the cleanest state in the union. Scandinavians, utterly honest. They dump 100,000 Somalis on them. Immediately the welfare rolls double. Suddenly they're having all kinds of child rape, human smuggling, lots of credit card skimming. And I will also give you the largest state in the union, California, a paradise, the most gigantic, wealthy, upper middle class. I mean, California had figured it out. They had a balanced budget every year. 20 million Mexicans move in, and now it's a deficit that rivals most of the rest of the world. I think it's like 60 billion. It's preposterous, the deficit. They cannot pay for themselves. So yeah, it actually does make a difference bringing in lots of third world people. I also did not say, like Trump, I didn't say specific countries. What I said is we don't have sink or swim. So we do need to have some way to try to skim the cream of the world the way we used to. And we sure aren't doing it now.
Fair point. I just want to clarify it. So if there was a physicist who was, or some AI genius, and they were coming from a country that wasn't Scandinavia, of course.
Of course, but what the other side does is cite, I mean, that Fortune 500 thing, yeah, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they cite the, you know, a few really, really successful immigrants who are from, still talking, from South Africa, from Russia. And then, yeah, okay, we get 10 of those and 20 million leaf blowers. No, this isn't.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay, we are unbelievably running very low on time. Here's what I'd like to do. Before we go to closing statements, what I'd like to do is, the proposition tonight was, should America shut its borders? You could interpret that one of two ways. You can interpret that, should America solve the problem at the southern border, or should America stop immigration at all? And I would love for each of you to each take 1 minute. If you're President of the United States, could happen. There might be an open convention. Let's see. What would you do? Like, what does a sensible immigration policy actually look like? Because I don't think anyone on this stage would defend what's happening at the southern border right now.
Yeah. So let's get constructive. So I love this question. So number one, I would hire a lot more Border Patrol. Number two, I would hire a lot more asylum judges. And these are relatively easy to do. And we waste so much money in this country. And that's something that all of us want to do. So that would stem some of the tide. But the best way to stem the tide, but you need that. The second part that you need is for us to do a reasonable, sane immigration policy for documented immigrants so we can get all that new blood in. Look, it's easy to look back and say, well, I would have let the Jewish businesses in. I mean, that's a super convenient thing to say. And I would have let Peter Thiel in, and I would have let Elon Musk in, but I wouldn't have let anybody else in. But you don't know who Elon Musk is. You don't know who's going to be amazing, et cetera. So we need, and we do far too little documented immigrants. But by the way, once we increase the size of the documented immigrants, then if you cross the border, after we increase it and we gave you plenty of opportunity to do it the right way, then you're one and done. Then once you cross the border illegally and we catch you, you can never return. So that is a fair trade. And the last thing I would do is a Marshall Plan for Latin America. And the reason that I would do that is not just because it's the moral thing to do, because it's stunningly successful. So when we did it for Germany, Japan, Turkey, and Greece, we turned those, especially Germany and Japan, our greatest enemies into our greatest allies. They became an incredible economic engine that was trading partner for us. The number one reason people are coming is because of economic desperation. The people who used to come here the most were Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala. But now the huge fluxes of immigrants, in fact, they stayed relatively the same under Trump and Biden. The extra people are largely from Venezuela and Colombia. Is it because they were all of a sudden got a memo in Colombia? Time to replace the whites. Okay, let's go do a replacement theory. No, they were desperate and had to come here because of the situation in Venezuela. So help those countries and then
a Marshall Plan for Latin America, more Border Patrol agents, more asylum judges, a more sensible policy. Nick, 1 minute. What would you do?
Yeah, I mean, the libertarian in me would never forgive myself if I didn't point out the Marshall Plan is one of the most oversold ideas in history. Germany, the German economic miracle took place after the controls put on by the U.S. and the allies on the German economy were lifted off, and Konrad Adenauer, changed things out. Okay.
Our border, what would you do?
Our border, what I would
our
do,
immigration policy.
Make it easier to come into the country legally, do more of the processing in the home countries, and then you will have people walking through the door showing papers. You can go to a Staples in America and get a TSA pre-check. We can come up with ways of helping to process more people who don't have criminal records, who don't have communicable diseases, or at least none that are worse than whatever the president has, and then bring them here. You forbid them from getting welfare and things like that, and things will thrive. That's what happened in the past, and it would happen again now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sohrab.
Southern agriculture took much longer to industrialize or mechanize than agriculture in the North. Why was that? Because in the South, for a long time, they could rely on free labor. Likewise, we have the same process going on. Just having a giant output GDP, just because we have lots of people, that's not national prosperity. Right? We could have, we could bring in 100 million people and just give them, agricultural, old school agricultural equipment without machines to do stuff. And that would look like GDP growth. But it's not the kind of labor-saving technology that pushes our economy to the next stage. And as long as we have mass cheap labor, our economy won't go to that next stage. That next industrial revolution, whatever it may be, it's hindered because there's no incentive to use labor-saving technology. So what I would do is I would close off in low-wage migration, period. Only skills-based migration. And then I would stop the mockery that we've made of the asylum process, where we treat economic migrants and wink at them and call them asylum seekers. It's violating international law in a way because there's a clear definition of what a refugee really is. And 80% of these people, at the very least, are not. I've embedded with them. I've traveled with them as a reporter. They are not asylum seekers. The vast majority are properly counted as economic migrants.
Thanks, Sohrab.
For one thing, I totally agree with that, except I say 100% of the asylum seekers are fake, phony frauds. It's also the worst way to get people into our country. So, fantastic, you wrecked your country. Why don't you come here? Great idea. If you come from a stable country, a successful country, you can never get asylum because, you had foresight and wisdom and you guys got it all together. No, you're out. Only you who have wrecked your countries Venezuela, case in point. I kept reading in the New York Times how they're all cheering for Chavez. I know it's now Maduro, his handpicked successor. He promised the poor, I'm going to steal from the rich and give it back to you. And every few years they'd reelect him, and the New York Times is so excited. Maybe they could finally get communism that works. And they're all waving their red hats, and he tells them to move on to the golf courses. He actually expropriated all of these farms, private farms, golf clubs, and told the poor to move on to the golf clubs. And they're out waving their red hats for Chavez. And now they've wrecked their country, so they want to come here and collect our welfare instead. So no asylum cases. One other point is, look, most of these laws are already on the books. You know, even if you qualify for asylum under the law, you are supposed to be held in detention. You are supposed to be turned away at our border right now if you could possibly become a public charge. No, instead we're handing them free iPhones and here's your free housing. You can't get in if you pass through another country where you could get asylum. I mean, that's another thing about the humanitarian relief. Why do they all have to come here? Can't we help them where they are? Couldn't we help them in a nearby country? All of them have to pass through Mexico to get here, and by law, Mexico takes refugees, so automatically they should be turned away. And a third one, actually, there are many more, but a third one that is obviously being ignored is they have to show that they've had all their vaccinations. Okay, nobody's being stopped. Nobody's being turned away. Not one of these alleged asylees should be getting in at the border. So that goes to what kind of laws you write. You can't write the laws you want because the people enforcing them won't enforcing them. You need a border and a total shutdown on immigration just to get our books in order.
Okay.
There's much more to be said, but the thing I want to say before I forget it is just that earlier in the debate and said, well, of course it was bad that FDR turned away that, boat full of European Jews. And, of course the physicists who helped us win, World War II should have been allowed in. But then she just said that 0 asylum seekers should be let in. So, maybe the claim is that if something really bad happens that people need asylum comes from, she'll support repealing the policies that she wants now, but at the very least, these things are in pretty severe tension with each other. Oh, you're muted, Brent. Oh, there we go.
Thanks. Okay. At the risk of, sounding like I'm being yet again that anarchist. All right. So Ann Coulter, everybody look right there, because that 100% comment, that is endemic of fascist thinking. Specifically, fascism is an anti-rational movement. They take pride in saying dumbass shit like that doesn't even make any sense. Specifically because it's not really a movement. It's not like a political ideology like socialism, Marxism, anarchism. It's something that tends to happen to a certain group of people when a society starts to destabilize around and the ruling class loses faith in capitalism as a way to maintain their hegemony. But everything that she's talking in there, you notice that she went straight to talking about the only good immigrants are coming from Scandinavia. Yeah, she's doing the master race shit. She's barely hiding it. And what makes me worried about this is not specifically her, but because again, she's a clown, but the level of infiltration those kinds of ideas have on the right, not even just the far right, just the right in general, it's very, very dangerous. So that's point one. Point two, asylum seekers need to actually be fleeing something, Anne. The whole point of you seeking asylum is you're not safe in your own country. So, like, yeah, is there somebody who might flee from Germany to the United States right now? No, probably not, because Germany has the rule of law. Finally, the idea that the people are the ones who ruin their countries. Yes, the people who have no power, the people who live in a dictatorship or a kleptocracy. Those are the people who ruined their country. Really, Anne? No. The people that ruin their country is their leaders. So, yeah, I would say, like, overall, she is not a serious person, just in general. But pay attention, because that rhetoric is like, that is straight through the Republican Party and a decent amount of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I also would just say that it was actually really funny, because this is like, there's just supposed to be 1 minute statements where you were laying out like your positive vision, right? Like you could, if you could push a button tomorrow, right? What would you want the immigration policies to be? And we pretty much got that for the other three. Gillespie and Sohrab both started off with things that weren't quite that, right? But everybody, the first three more or less gave that.
They accidentally agreed with each other towards the end when Gillespie was talking about a Marshall Plan, I think, or
Cenk was talking about a Marshall Plan at the beginning, right?
So yeah, Gillespie, but yeah, Cenk and the Catholic guy, they agreed with each other accidentally.
Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways, I actually think just a one-on-one debate between the two of them would have been more interesting, because quite a bit of this ended up being, and we're not quite done yet. We still got clues and statements, but like quite a bit of this ended up being Gillespie versus Coulter, which is roughly the shape of the immigration debate that we usually get, right? That you have the sort of libertarianism versus like, evil clown shit. Mm-hmm. Whereas, I think like, I think Sohrab and Cenk have enough premises in common that it might be interesting, right? To see them talk about this, one-on-one. But yeah, so the first three more or less did that. But then when it got to Anne, she just really didn't do that at all. I mean, like she just started monologuing. Yeah, I mean, she mostly. I mean, it was really like, yeah, she spent like during the like 4 or 5 minutes of her 1 minute closing, her 1 minute response, she spent at least half of it talking about Venezuela, right? Like and ranting about like Venezuela. And by the way, even at the height of Chavez's welfare state, the public sector in Venezuela employed a smaller percentage of Venezuelans than the public sector in France employs French people. So, like,
When I first got to New York, one of my first jobs was at Carnegie Hall. And we actually had the Venezuelan brass come to play with Dudamel. And it was freaking mind-blowing to me. One, because it was an incredible performance, but two, you have these people coming from a country that is constantly demonized, and you see what every one of those people were able to do it specifically because of La Sistema, which was a program that Chavez put into practice to find kids who needed something to do to learn and put an instrument in their hands. And we get like a freaking world-class symphony. But, Anne here is mad that they apparently expropriated the golf
course. Yeah.
That sounds great, actually.
Yeah. But no, all for that, right? But it's like, yeah, look, it's just the idea that, like, I mean, first of all, the idea that like the New York Times ever loved Chavez is, just like, this is just news from an alternate dimension. Secondly,
communists,
or communism, right? So yeah, well, that's the first part, right? First, the New York Times loves Chavez, and secondly, that like Chavez's Venezuela is communism, which is again, like, yeah, there were some like big reforms relative to Venezuela's starting point, right? But that starting point was dismal enough, right? That like, if you're going to talk about communism, I mean, again, a larger percentage of Venezuelans under Chavez were employed by the private sector than French people. So like, this is just not reality here. And so, yeah, very telling that she's talking about that. Obviously, you're also right that, they ruin their countries, right? So it's that there's just no distinction being made whatsoever between governments and individual citizens. And then
the halo effect. It's the psychological tendency to fallaciously equate one part of something with everything. And it can go in a positive way or a negative way. That's how the ad hominem arguments work. They trick the brain into assigning one characteristic to the entirety of it. So if I have a bad beard, I am clearly wrong about the things that are it's exactly the same argument. What she's just applying it to countries that she's vaguely heard of having problems and are associated with the left, and everything else is just it's literally just bad stereotypes. There's no reality to any of this. But again, what she's doing is she's not trying to make a persuasive, intelligent argument. She is trying to play on people's biases, and she's trying to she's essentially trying to stoke hate so that she can benefit from that hate, because the more people get mad at her, the more people are paying attention to her. There is no such thing as bad publicity, and that's how you get Ann Coulters. That's how you get Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yeah. I would also say, maybe predictably out of the four. So Ann Coulter barely said anything about what she actually wants to happen. She was just doing a free association series of rants.
Racist slam poetry. I think that, you need that on a shirt.
Sohrab was essentially no low wage immigration, because this is, basically what you expect him to say, given what he's been arguing the entire debate. Nick.
Before you get off Sohrab, I wanted to point this out because this is a debate tactic thing. He made a massive mistake when he tried to respond to an argument that had not been made. No one on this panel had said, "Oh, you're an immigrant" or whatever. I know, I may have missed that, but if he would,
not really. I mean, there were a few references here and there, but I mean, like not really anything that merited like him responding to it as if, this was something that was like an accusation on the table. Like it was there were like the closest I can remember is like a few like, Cenk saying it's like, hey, Sohrab and I are legal immigrants. We commit the least crime of all, right? Stuff like that, right? But it's like nobody said, oh, you're a hypocrite, right? Yeah. Like that seems more like something he was worried somebody might say. But
he prepared for it, and guys, you never want to do that in a debate, because then you're just drawing attention to it, and the thing that people are going to remember is not his supposed loyalty to the United States now. Have more pride in yourself, man. But two, the last
you don't need to make arguments on people's behalf, even if you prepared a response. You don't need to bring it up to respond to it. And I get it. I respect the fact that he's an over preparer, but I mean the art to this is that like you have to prepare for everything and then only use the stuff that actually comes up. But yeah, Nick was just standard issue libertarian stuff. So maybe open borders, but no welfare state, or no welfare state for immigrants at least, which again, I'm actually in favor. I actually think you need to have targeted economic help for immigrants when they first come over, to help them integrate into the society, housing, not be in a position that they're desperate enough to take any job anybody offers them, all that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of get jobs from that, and probably good jobs on a government salary, with benefits.
Yeah. So out of the four, maybe unsurprisingly, Cenk is the answer that I liked the best. Not that I necessarily agree with every detail, but I think most of what he said was fine. I actually have no problem with hiring more Border Patrol agents if the Border Patrol is no longer in the business of like trying to like root out peaceful people who are just trying to live their lives, right? If it's like only interested in like stopping like vetting and stopping people who actually should be stopped, right? Then I'm actually fine with that. But then like the thing that I liked best about Cenk, although I didn't think he went nearly far enough with this, is that he was the only person on the stage who so much as suggested that part of this story is like, why do so many people want to leave these places? I mean, I guess Ann Coulter, in her own demented way, did raise the issue, right? But like, he was the only person who raised from a sane perspective the issue of why is it that so many people want to leave their home countries in the first place, and should part of the solution be a solution to that, right? And because everybody else is just kind of taking it as a fact of nature that, of course, people are going to want to leave, global South countries at huge numbers.
And maybe if we didn't do the freaking Operation Condor, they would be less likely to leave.
Well, this is what I was going to say, right? Because I think that I'll give Cenk for credit for being the only person to introduce the issue in a non-Ann Coulterish way, but I think but I think the whole thing about should do a Marshall Plan or whatever, it's like I think what he's really missing is what you're talking about, right? That it's not, I'm all for the U.S. giving short-term economic assistance to to countries in Latin America. I'm certainly not objecting to that point, right? The Marshall Plan analogy. In fact, I think you could justify that as
reparations.
Exactly. Yeah. Reparations. But I think the real point is like, look, the U.S. has been a tremendous obstacle to any kind of social progress in these countries. I mean, this is look at there's as recently as 2018, right? When Lula went down, was imprisoned in Brazil, there's tremendous amount of circumstantial evidence, at least, that the U.S. was heavily involved in that effort. I'm not sure. I haven't followed this closely enough over the years to know if there's more non-circumstantial evidence now, but they certainly acted that way, right? Certainly it's the case that there was a bipartisan, hostility towards, Lula and the Workers' Party in the U.S. Read what Obama says about him in his memoir, and then obviously Trump was very enthusiastically in favor of the whole thing, whether or not he had more of a hand in it. It's not like Lula is it's not like Lula is like the Venezuelan Che Guevara, right? I mean, this is like a very moderate social democratic government.
Allende in Chile, who was overthrown, by Pinochet, and this was used to specifically bring the Chicago boys, the right libertarian ideology, which Nick is currently also promoting to an extent on the stage. You know, I mean, Allende was not a danger to the United States. He was not even affiliated with like the USSR. So you can't even use that argument. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Castro told him to arm the workers right beforehand. He said, no, you know, we have laws, we have, you know, a certain way of doing things here, and we don't need to resort to, you know, people with guns in the street, and then look what happened. So yeah.
I mean, Allende was actually like, I mean, in a really good way, right? You know, what was actually a radical socialist, but like, yeah, but you even have people like Lula who are absolutely not, you know, who have run up against this stuff. It's just like incredibly difficult to, you know, like even sort of very modest social democratic reforms. The obstacles to that in Latin America are so huge. I mean, it's you know, it's genuinely ridiculous how little will get people overthrown in many cases. And of course, a lot of that, you know, is about the homegrown oligarchy. But like Uncle Sam is just a huge part of that equation. And
read War is a Racket by General Smedley Butler. You know?
Yeah, right. I mean, my God, you know, we had to, like, you know, I mean, you know, certainly if you think about, you know, I mean, if you think about like, I mean, really, there are recent examples like, you know, Honduras, where, you know, there was a coup openly supported by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton that had that, you know, that led to massive instability and like a huge wave of you know, of people coming over from there. That's like that's a, you know, example from, you know, from the late 2000s. We have, you know, certainly if you look at, you know, at Haiti, which is a place that, you know, lots of migrants have come over from. I mean, this is you know, it's in this century, right? Like you know, in 2004, you had the head of you know, you had the president of Haiti being escorted out of the country. He says he was kidnapped, you know, by U.S. Marines, you know, and they just a couple years ago, right? You know, you had the guy who was president then assassinated under you know, pretty suspicious circumstances in terms of like the Miami connections, the people, you know, who did it. So, and you know, and you could even look at the way that like. Again, to pick on Hillary again, like one of the things that came out in the WikiLeaks cables was, you know, was the State Department under her joining a bunch of other people in lobbying against raising the minimum wage in Haiti to the princely sum of $5 a day, you know, from about $2 a day, I believe, which is where it had been before, which is something, God, you know, year before last. So, yeah, almost 2 years ago when I did my debate with Curtis Yarvin in Chicago, this is, I brought all this up, and, you know, Yarvin's, you know, army of, you know, basement dwelling Nazi fans have, you know, like brought this up many times since then. They just think this is hilarious, that it's like, oh, I just think all Haiti needs is a higher minimum wage. It's like, no, this is a small example of the fact that the Haiti is in the condition that it's in because of centuries of nonstop, you know, of nonstop foreign meddling that have led it to be in this condition. Yeah.
Yeah. We have not been the best neighbor, to say the least. And honestly, that's why I said like a Marshall Plan would probably be, you know, it would be in a way unofficial reparations, and it would probably be for us as well. But what I wanted to jump on, to get it back to the debate, there was something else I really wanted to point out about Cenk. Remember what he did there. He stayed on the zero immigrants line that Coulter had objected to in her incredibly weird way. And he pointed out that by the end of that, there were still zero immigrants that had come over the border and had carried out a terror attack. It's really important if you have a win like that, it is very important to have the last word on it. And if you can't get the last word, you really need to make it obvious that you have made this point and they are wrong, just objectively. You won't get everybody, but you will get the people who are at the very least reasonable.
Yeah.
Many arguments tonight, well made. We're now going to go to closing statements, and we're going to do it in the reversed order. So, Cenk, we're going to start with you. I'm putting 2 minutes on the clock. Closing statements for the night. Yeah, please.
So, guys, I think that some on the left do make it racial about immigration, and I don't like that, and I don't think that that's fair or right. But there is something that's driving this visceral reaction to immigrants when it's not crime or employment or any of the other things that are the ostensible reasons. And that's the resistance to change. And it's tough. You know, look, I'm politically progressive, but in nature, I'm conservative. I don't like change. I don't like taking a new road. I didn't like it when they put a Walmart in my hometown because it was new, it was different. I didn't want it, right? So I understand that reaction, but we can't give into it. Every time a country has closed its borders, it's closed itself to the world. It has been greatly counterproductive. We do not want to do that. When we talk about culture, what is our culture? Our culture is not some thing that was just created, whether it was in 1770 or 1970. It's an amalgamation of all of us. So, I mean, the easiest place to see it, of course, is in the food, right? So, what's the most American thing? Pepperoni pizza, that's from Italy. Bagel and lox, that's Jewish. Like, we can go on and on and on. We are the world. That's what's great about America. That's what made us stronger, not weaker. And so you think, well, I know, but we don't want to let the poor in. My dad came to this country with literally $1 in his pocket. You don't know who's going to make it. That's what's beautiful about this country. And the people that are coming in, as we've already proven, are not criminals. What they are people who are desperately trying to give their families a better life. You know what that guy's going to do who went through that perilous, perilous journey and risked his life to get here? He's going to work really hard. He came for the hope. He came for his family. So I don't want them breaking the law. I don't want an out-of-control system like we have now. But if we are open-minded enough and open-hearted enough in this country, we will have the country that we all love and care for that we have today. And you would have shut off Abdel Fattah Jandali, and if we had gone with the closed border system, and he was a 21-year-old Syrian, unacceptable, we can't have him, he was poor. That's Steve Jobs' dad. And we would have cost ourselves $1 trillion. We immigrants in this country are America, and America is immigrants. If we stop that, then we're not even America anymore.
Okay, thank you so much, Cenk. Next, we're going to go to Sohrab.
So I didn't tell you this, but the last time I spent any significant amount of time in Texas was in about 2005 to 2007 when I was a Teach for America school teacher in Brownsville, Texas, on the southmost tip. And no, don't clap because wait. And I came as a typical kind of a carpetbagger with this sense that I'm here to rescue these people from their benighted and oppressed conditions. And as part of that, I published my first ever public op-ed in the Brownsville Herald, opposing a tough border bill that had been floated in the House of Representatives at the time. And I said something like, there are no illegal people, there's no such thing as an illegal person, only aspiring migrants and so on who are poised to transform our nation for the better. And I ended it with the phrase, si se puede, not knowing in my 20-something ignorance that Cesar Chavez was a ferocious opponent of mass migration of that kind. And I went to school the next day. I swaggered in with pride, thinking the benighted are going to cheer me. All my fellow teachers and 99% of the students were Mexican American, and I thought they were going to like put me on their shoulders and sing hosannas to me. They all hated the op-ed. And Mr. Gonzalez, I don't know if he's, maybe he'll catch this on C-SPAN or something. Mr. Gonzalez sat me down in his office and more or less said, what the fuck is this? This is all wrong. And so think about it. Think about it. Why is it that employer lobbies always favor higher rates of migration and oppose deterrence against illegal migration? And why is it that today, 53%, according to Pew, 3% of Hispanic Americans favor immediate deportation of illegals, and 70% favor tougher restrictions? These people aren't racist. These people aren't nativists. They just understand that the kind of mass migration we have now works for a narrow stratum of society, but impoverishes the people who most actually need help. And the working class of this country has been battered, not just by offshoring, which is one form of corporate arbitrage, but mass low-wage migration, which is the other form of corporate arbitrage. You should oppose it and support tonight's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohrab. Nick Gillespie.
I'm happy to hear that even new Hispanic Mexican students, barely new in this country, had taken on the tradition of hating their teacher. It shows how quickly people assimilate, and that's part of something we didn't talk about today. Assimilation keeps happening. My Italian grandparents came here they were economic refugees. And we shouldn't talk about asylees or things like that. Most people come here to make a better life, if not for them, for their kids. My Italian grandparents never spoke English. I never had a conversation with them, and yet they made America great. You'll remember a few years ago, the nativist congressman from Iowa, Steve King, talked about how he was channeling a Dutch politician saying, you can't save civilization with somebody else's babies. And yet my Italian grandparents had two sons who fought in World War II in Korea and saved our civilization. This is what immigrants do, and they change America. We change in reaction to them. They change us, and it goes on. Cenk mentioned talking about pepperoni pizza. Recently, Italian food, after decades as the most popular cuisine in America, was unseated by Mexican food. There is nothing more American than that. And if we shut our borders, then we are shutting down what makes this country great, which is the creative destruction and the constant state of becoming. And we are a beacon to the world because people can come here and they can do what they want as much as possible. The American dream is to come here and make a better life for yourself, your kids, your grandkids, even the ones that you can't talk to. Trying to create a black market in people by shooting prohibition, creating prohibition for people is terrible, and it will destroy the electric pole of that magnet, which is American prosperity. Don't shut the borders, keep them open, and keep us going and growing. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. Last up, Ann Coulter.
To pick up on what Sohrab said about his Mexican classmates not wanting any more illegal immigrants from Mexico. Well, yeah, duh, everybody who came here, apparently they didn't want to live in Venezuela. They didn't want to live in Senegal. They didn't want to live in Mexico. And by the way, we've already taken 1/3 of Mexico. So here's a thought experiment for you. If it makes no difference what they've done in their own countries in 1,000 years, not establishing a stable government, then why don't we just make every Latin American country an American state? Would that make a difference? Would our country be the same country it is? Because even though immigrants, and I mean both legal and illegal, commit a boatload of crime, and you can look at the prison records, you can look at the immigrant hotspots, you can look at the real statistics, even though they collect a boatload of welfare and commit every terrorist attack, that isn't the main point I'm making. It is about saving our country. Do we remember Mexico throwing back the Nazi war machine? Why, no, they did nothing in World War II. That was the United States of America. It's been the United States of America that has rescued the rest of the world from tsunamis, from earthquakes, from warlords, from starvation, and not by saying, hey, move in. Once this country is gone, and we're heading there fast, it's lights out for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Okay. I am not moving here to bias one side. I am moving here so you can see the screen. It is time to see which side.
All right, don't give a shit. Debates shouldn't have polls in them. It's again, I'm not going to repeat my rant from last Thursday, but it's really just kind of an insult to everybody's intelligence. That's not how persuasion works. So yeah, I think that to me, the closing statements were maybe less interesting than what had come before that. We didn't get a lot new there, except for some and culture opinions about Mexico and World War II.
Yeah. By the way, she's 1,000% wrong that Mexico did not fight against fascism. I don't know if they contributed to the war effort in World War II. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But the reason you saw me flip out when that happened is that Mexico was one of the only nations to support the Spanish Republic against Franco. They go back, read Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. He literally talks about the Mexican rounds being the best ones and the Mexican rifles at the same time, because everything else was like secondhand and stored from World War I. So yeah, Mexico has for a very long time contributed to the battle against autocracy and fascism. If they did not do that, and I would not be at all surprised if they did do it. If they didn't do that in World War II, they absolutely did it when the United States and the entire liberal West were not battling fascism. But again, she is not a serious person. We had 3 adults and a clown on the stage.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I should say, Mexico was on the Allied side of the war. Their actual participation in their actual direct military participation was pretty limited. It wasn't non-existent. I mean, they had I think there was a token participation, right? By the Mexican Air Force, but by and large, they weren't. But the point about the Spanish Civil War is a good one, is an excellent one, actually. And I'd also, also just like all this stuff about 1,000 years, right? It's like first of all, if we're still talking about Mexico right now, that hasn't existed for 1,000 years, but to put it mildly, right? This is a place that got its independence way after the U.S. did. And the U.S. certainly hasn't existed for 1,000 years. But if we're talking about civilization in general, and it's very unclear what her standards are here, right? Because they're
not consistent.
Yeah, because if the U.S. is going to presumably, I think, in Ann Coulter's worldview, is going to get credit for the civilizational accomplishments of Brits and Northern Europeans, then presumably Mexico should get credit for the civilizational accomplishments of Spain, right? I mean, that would be a consistent standard. But yeah, she clearly doesn't have one of those. And also just, I don't know, man, you think about the last 1,000 years of European history, there's a lot of stuff that you shouldn't be very happy about there, even, and that's not just me saying it from
you're not scolding anyone.
Yeah. I mean, this is not me saying this from me as a radical socialist crazy person. I'm just saying I think there's a lot of stuff in the last 1,000 years of European civilization that we'd have pretty wide consensus was not something that you should look back on fondly, right? For example, she mentions World War II and she says Mexico didn't save the world from fascism in World War II. Yeah, where did the threat from which the world needed to be saved originate? Right?
Shit. I didn't. Yeah. Wow. Okay. One, I love that argument. I'm going to remember it. I will say one thing though for Ann Coulter. I think I would prefer a leaf blower to Elon Musk. I think we might get a little bit more value out of that.
Yeah. I mean, this is all. This is a source of mild frustration with the entire panel. that everybody is given, I guess Sohrab didn't really mention it, but certainly the other three are all given the sort of idea of the great entrepreneurial tech genius way more credence than you should, right? Like read like Rob Larson's Bit Tyrants if you want a better sense of who these guys are. But like the idea that the economy is, like we got a 100 trillion, jobs and all this stuff because of this great innovation by these guys. Like, yeah, those are the plutocrats who are able to harvest the economic consequences of stuff that by and large they did not invent. Right? Like that's the more accurate way to put it.
Elon Musk has never invented anything in his life. There's one exception, and that's that he shares a patent with another engineer on a proprietary plug for the Teslas. That is his only patent. And like even Thomas Edison, he was an actual inventor. He did make things. But ultimately, he just got the credit for everyone else's inventions as the Wizard of Menlo Park. We have a hard time, like even with screenwriting, humans have a very, very hard time focusing on a group of people. It is much easier, and that's why you almost always see a dramatic story focused around a single protagonist. It is because we have an easier way of projecting ourselves into the shoes of one person than into the shoes of a giant indifferentiated man.
Yeah. I mean, like I think that, Mariana Mazzucati, that might be wrong, but there's a woman with an Italian name who wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State. And this is like the only TED talk that I ever recommend, is the one that she gave about it. And she does this thing where she like takes out an iPhone and she essentially points out, look, it's like, think about everything that makes this thing a smartphone and not a dumb phone. And she just goes through the whole list. And it's like, yeah, this is all stuff that was, this is all stuff that was developed in the state sector, right? I mean, that's like the internet, obviously, right? Comes from DARPA, but like touchscreen technology, global positioning, like all of this stuff that like all the defining features of this that would have like blown somebody's mind in, the mid 90s, right? Like this, this is all stuff that comes from publicly funded research, right? It's just that like people like Steve Jobs were the people that we, that like our system allowed to reap the benefits of it, right? But like, it's the idea that these were the sort of genius, innovators, who everything relies on is just not accurate. Like by and large, there's like I'm not even saying that the private companies played no role in this process, but I mean, like by and large, the fundamental innovations were made by, yes, one, it'd be very hard to make Hollywood movies because you're mostly talking about like big teams of people working together, to your point. And mostly they're doing it in labs that are either like at public universities or happen within the Defense Department often, because we live in a sick society that concentrates resources in on the military rather than on other. I mean, there's nothing magical about the military. That's the only thing that we can, place where innovation can happen. That just happens to be where we concentrate a lot of state resources right now.
There's a little bit more to it than that. Specifically, the military and the military-industrial complex, these are some of the only remaining factory production jobs in the United States. So essentially, every time the government does this like huge, massive, military budget, it's one of the only ways they can inject a ton of cash into the economy without like getting everybody pissed off, because people just tend to pay more attention to that which threatens them as opposed to that which may benefit them. So there is the simultaneous political will and the fact that it is economically incentivized that is driving this, the military-industrial complex. So that's one of the reasons why it gets focused on. The other reason is people like explosions and stuff.
But but I mean, there is, I mean, that's not, that itself is a choice, right? I mean, like you could have other kinds of manufacturing, going on, within the United States.
This is why we can't have nice things.
So yes, all of the like great man theory of technology stuff we got on the stage on both sides, I disliked, but I'll also say one thing, right? So it's like, obviously, I like, the overwhelming majority of what Cenk said today, and, have generally positive feelings about the guy. I mean, I think I've been pretty upfront about my, his co-host is a good friend, whatever. But but the one thing that I do think, and I heard him saying here, and I've heard him and other people at TYT say a bunch of other places. The one thing that I think does fall short, that I heard a couple times tonight, is that there is this tendency to blame everything on like campaign finance. And don't get me wrong, I would be all in favor of like much stricter campaign finance laws, obviously, right? I think I think that the extent to which, you're allowed to just like hand people like giant comical bags with dollar signs on them, in the US elections, is absurd. But I think if you're hyper focusing on that this way, I think you're missing like most of the problem, because honestly, even most capitalist countries do not have campaign finance laws that are as ridiculous as ours, right? That there are many, many places where that's much more restricted, but it's like, look, that doesn't mean that the state isn't responsive to what the owners of the means of production want, right? I mean, that's that's a much more basic problem, right? It's like, if you want to say that the situation of campaign finance laws makes it even worse, I'm certainly not going to fight about that, right? Like, sure, fair enough. But by and large, if you have all the structural economic power, that is going to translate into political power. That's not just a question of like corruption or, clean government or anything. I mean, that's just a structural thing about societies where you have this kind of concentrated economic power, right? Because if the thing that happens at the base of society that keeps everything going is under the control of this group of people, that group of people is going to be listened to a lot, right? What they want. And then you add in the sort of basic power that, the capitalist class has, not every member, but enough of them, right? To make their will done politically, which is that if they get mad enough, they can just leave, right? Take their operations elsewhere, right? Then they're going to have like a huge amount of, they're going to have a huge amount of control over state policy. And, this is, like everything I just said, even just sort of scratches the surface of it. But, this is a much, much more basic issue. And I think this is like kind of a unfortunate thing about kind of, I think the sort of like brand of, Cenk used the phrase tonight, progressive populism, right? That he's probably one of the people who helped innovate, right? That it's, because I don't know, like the Citizens United decision happened when it did, and in his political trajectory or whatever. Like I think that there's this real tendency to overestimate that in a way that like kind of leaves most of the problem off the hook. That it's like, yeah, we could have some super enlightened European laws where, the people can't spend that much on campaigns and they can only campaign for 6 weeks before the election and all that stuff. And it would nonetheless be the case that, Jeff Bezos would have a hell of a lot more political influence than people who work in his warehouses.
Yeah. Well, so, there's a thing called Dunbar's number. And the people have gone back and forth on exactly what it is, and apparently, but it's like the human brain cannot really distinguish more than about 150 or so individuals. Now, some say it's 300, some say it's less, but everybody else just gets grouped into this, them, the masses, the people that you can't recognize as an individual and thus do not seem fully human to you, even though they are absolutely fully human. People like Anne exploit this, but also it leads to a consolidation of power in the hands of the ruling class. Because naturally, if you're a politician, the people that and care about are in that 150 Dunbar's number. You may generally care about everybody else out there. You might feel that your constituency wants you to do this or that, but ultimately it is the real direct human relationships between the most powerful people in the country that drives this type of institutional capture. As Noam Chomsky famously said, when he was asked about Ron Paul, every developed society where there are levers of power to grab, the capitalists will always grab the levers of power, and then they will rewrite the rules of the society and create a situation where the government is supporting them and theirs, whether they deserve to be supported or not. It's a really big bug in the Republican liberal capitalist system, and it's something that I do hope in the next century we can move past. I got to ask you something though, Ben, and
Sure.
Remind me, did Ann Coulter also speak first?
She did. That actually occurred to me. So this is something that I've only seen a few times. I've even benefited from it once in the recent past, but it always still bugs me on principle that when people will say, "Oh, people are going to speak in this order in the openings, and they're going to reverse the order in the closings." So when I did my my Monk Debates podcast thing with Jamie Kirchick, they did that, and so I got to speak first and last, and it's obviously in the moment I'm not going to object, but in principle I don't like it, right? It's no, fuck that. You get to either speak first or speak last, right? I mean, you should because that balances out, right? It's crazy to give the same person the first word and the last word.
When people are dealing with multiple points of data, they most remember the first point and the last point. Everything else, they have a much harder time. I suspect that Anne was given it because they knew she would be, Anne, they knew she would say all that shit. And they were probably banking on, the increased traffic. Though also, Anne, she's not really a political mover and shaker anymore. She was in the 90s and the late and in the mid and early 2000s.
Yeah, but also Ann Coulter's star could fall pretty far and she could still be a bigger deal than anybody else on that stage, right?
Point. On that note, by the way, also, I really wanted to, again, I'm going to compliment Cenk here. And it's not just because, I like his way of speaking and his progressive politics are not completely abhorrent to me. Though, honestly, I think I would have a much more fun time talking to Nick. And plus, hey, leather jacket, cool guy. But Cenk did what is very, very, very important that a lot of them did not, and that is he articulated a story, a narrative every single time he spoke. And he drew everything together into a narrative when he spoke at the end. This is just, it would be wonderful if humans could just get and remember and pay attention to all of the data and come to a reasonable conclusion. However, that is not how people absorb information. People absorb information as narrative, always. And even facts that they think aren't part of a narrative, they just haven't identified it. So if your intent is to get your message out and to persuade people, you have to be able to craft a narrative. You can't just give them these points of data and come to your own conclusions here. So I think that, at the beginning of this whole thing, I praised Cenk's cadence, but, out of all of them, I really felt like he had the most charisma, and he was the one who was able to articulate, even when he was wrong, his general ideology in a way that I think was both understandable and resonated with the audience, except when dude, you're in Texas. You already figured it out with the egg on the stuff. Don't talk about the locks. Don't talk about the New York pizza. They're going to get annoyed. Well, maybe New York pizza.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, I actually will say, I think that Cenk did better here than some of the other debates that I've seen with him recently. I wonder if the format, is sort of better suited for his strengths, being more structured. But yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, yes. So I agree with you about the likely motivation, but yes, I think it's bad form. I think you should stick with the original order, and because again, if you, I'm, my, just like my preference is always going to be, like in a 2-person debate at least, right? Is always going to be to speak second, because I'd way rather have the last word than the first word. But like also it's just too much to give the same person both. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I personally prefer the first word, and that's strictly for one reason. It's because most people do not go past the opening arguments.
Yeah.
Anybody who has gone through the entire debate till where you get them with the last word, that's somebody who's already really paying attention, and they're going to be a bit more reasonable anyway. So they're less likely to get tricked by this or that cognitive bias. Yeah, I mean, I would say if you guys find yourselves up ready to do a debate with someone, especially if it's like somebody who's like, odious, like a freaking fascist or something, like an Ann Coulter, you need to really, really push it that does not happen. Because like, honestly, giving her the first word and the last word, not only is that bad form, it's like a bad idea. Because out of all of those people, she had the worst ideas and the dumbest arguments, but they were also like very simple and very emotionally resonant. So whoever came up with that, basically, they accidentally created a quasi channel of propaganda specifically for that, just in how they placed her. So it's not only is it a bad idea and it's not fair, but it's irresponsible when you've got somebody who is not a good faith debater, and is really just up there to fling shit at the wall.
All right, let's wrap up. This is good. We did. Glad. Yeah, I'm probably jinxing it, and I'm gonna glitch out in the next 10 seconds, but. We seem to have gone through it without any technical problems tonight, so pretty thrilled about that. But yeah, Brent, do you want to now we were just talking about who watches the beginning of things and who watches the end of it, and and all of that. The good news is that we're live on YouTube here, where numbers tend to pick up as you go on. But yeah, for anybody who missed last week, who are you? What are you up to? And where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, hey folks. So I am Brent Lengel. I am a playwright, Appalachian Trail 2000 miler, and author of a number of comic books and series, including Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. Started out as a play in Manhattan in 2010. It is the thing that will not die. And also Deruti Shadow of the People, which you guys can see behind me. This is a biopic/war epic about the life and death of real-life anarchist Buenaventura Durruti, who is one of my personal heroes, and almost nobody knows who he is. I'm obsessed, so I'm telling his life story. You guys can find me on YouTube, but I would recommend, if you want to pick up some of the comics, and please do, you either go to Scout Comics for Snow White Zombie Apocalypse or AK Press for Durruti, Shadow of the People, number 1 and 2. Or if you want to pay a little extra, follow me on Kickstarter. I depend upon crowdfunding to continue to make these books. And honestly, they're really, really good. Not because of me and my chicken scratch, but just because I've been able to work with some really, really amazing high-level artists. So if you want to help out, great. Yeah. And if you only got a couple bucks, just go to your local comic shop and ask for them. Beyond that, Google my name, Brenton Lengel, www.brentonlengel.com. And Ben has my my Linktree in the description.
Exactly. All right, sounds good. So I'm going to be back here on Thursday with Rob Larson. Rob and I are going to watch the debate. We're sticking with recent ones for a bit because there have been a cluster of them that I want to watch. So we're going to watch the debate between Glenn Greenwald and Alan Dershowitz on whether the U.S. should bomb Iran. So that is going to be a trip. It's
bad that I don't know what side either of them is going to argue for.
Oh, I do. I mean, it's look, I have increasingly many disagreements with Glenn these days, but he's always been good on matters of war and peace. And Alan Dershowitz is not.
Yeah.
He's
allegedly.
I actually feel like he at this point when we watch a debate with Dershowitz, like I sort of feel like it's the TV show, bringing on some villain from that people remember from the classic seasons, this is, it's like the Doctor Who episode where they have the Daleks or something, it's like, oh shit, it's Dersh. But looking forward to that. Thank you again, Brent. This was fun. Left is best.